All right, y'all, we're live. I'm gonna murder you both.
Hello.
Hi.
Our fun new music so we don't get in trouble anymore.
I couldn't hear the music.
What? Amy said she could hear it.
Oh, I
Amy
couldn't
lied
hear
to
it.
me.
Well, I couldn't. Maybe someone else could.
Well,
It is new. I've heard
wiggling.
it before, so I know it's very good.
All right. I gotta figure that out then, I guess.
So for context, the last episode, these fine humans got kicked off of Facebook because they played too much WAP.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as too much WAP?
Too much WAP for the internet, you know? It happens to the best of us. So we're doing a little bit of a different episode tonight than usual. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about why we're doing the episode differently tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know Des, and I've worked with Des at universities and at Michigan Tech as well. And so what we're doing is we are creating a series about how to be activists, how to be resistant, how to embrace your identities and your experiences in this work, in this world, in this time. And so we know that students aren't all the kind that can just march in a street or march in a parade or be proud and put up flags for their identities, but that maybe there are different ways that we can embrace these components of ourselves and our identity to be able to be resistant and be activated. And so this whole dynamic student dialogue series is really about that activation. It's about finding ways to do what you can do and to be who you are authentically. And how can we do that together? How can we uplift other folks? And how can we learn from other experiences that might be similar or different from our own?
Yeah.
Okay, Amy being a grown-up.
So tonight we're going to have a conversation that's specifically talking about sort of queer identities and suicide, and we're going to talk mostly from a position of lived experience like we usually do. But before we get started, we better tell people about the rating of our show, especially since we might have some new people involved. We are rated R for language, terror, and some disturbing images. So I am Jess Solomon-Rainey, and I am in so-called Denver, Colorado, which is on Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute, and Sioux stolen territory. Territory in that territory is still impacting. That's the stealing of that territory is still impacting people today and increasing suicide rates in that population. So I think it's important to recognize. I work at kind of the intersections of social justice and mental health and suicide, and run a hotline and a peer support line in Denver, Colorado. Des, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is the time when introducing myself actually doesn't feel weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, new people. I'm Desiree Stage. I created and run a multimedia series on suicide attempt survivors called Live Through This. You can see it at livethroughthis.org. I've interviewed almost 200 attempt survivors across the country. I also do a lot of other stuff, mostly yelling on Twitter about things I don't like that have to do with suicide. I'm an MSW student, a mom. I think that covers most of the things. I don't leave the house anymore, but that's standard at this point. I don't know.
So both Des and I are people who are suicide attempt survivors, and we're queer people. And I think there's just a lot of kind of discussion about queer suicide, but not a lot of it is sort of based in necessarily facts or people's experiences all the time. I think things get blown out of proportion sometimes about the sort of connection between like being queer and being suicidal. Like that's part of your identity as a queer person is being suicidal, which has not been my experience. So I wanted to just kind of like open up and talk about what we think the connections might actually be between queer people and suicide, and then talk about our own personal experiences.
Also, wait, let me in. I forgot to say that I'm on Lenny Lenape land, FYI, otherwise known as Philly.
Thanks. I think there is more data now than we've probably ever had about queer people's experiences with mental health and suicide, because there are some folks who are actually asking. So there are some like trans health surveys that have happened. The Trevor Project does a pretty significant youth survey, and I can drop that into the Facebook chat. But they have a 2020 survey that just came out about youth's experiences with mental health and suicide. But I think sort of the general like script that I hear about queer people and suicide is that like when you're young and you're queer, and especially if you're out, but maybe not if you don't even have to be out, like people might just know, or they might have an idea that you might be queer, that you're bullied and you're bullied into suicide basically. And sort of that's like the trajectory of the pathway that people get to think about for their lives as suicidal people a lot. So I think that's as queer people, not as suicidal people. See, I just did it. So I think that's kind of complicated, and it's not particularly helpful. And I can remember really clearly the first time that I associated being queer with it, like experiences of like trauma and violence and things like that. And I picked the very fortunate timing to come out just a couple of days, like to some friends at school, just a couple of days before Matthew Shepard was murdered. And it's interesting because like that wasn't a suicide, that was a murder. But I feel like not long after that is when there just started being this onslaught of people talking about like queer kids being bullied and then killing themselves. So for me, that was this like turning point, and it really made me feel like maybe that's what it meant to be a queer person, was to either be victimized or to kill yourself. I ended up being someone who did want to kill myself, but it had nothing to do with really my queer identity, although I had some experiences that were really tough and probably didn't help. But for me, I think that sort of over association made it really scary for me to be a young queer person in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Des, what about you?
I came out around the same time. I was 15 in high school. Matthew Shepard was murdered in 99, right? 98. I can't remember. Around then. And for me, it was, the queer experience was defined by violence, by loneliness, by an inability to ever have a family, marriage. I stayed closeted for a while after I figured out that that I was at least bisexual. Probably, I think it was a year before my mom found out, and I slowly told some friends. But as I was working through that and kind of giving myself an education on what it meant to be queer, I was watching all the films that were coming out at the time, and they traumatized my ass. Like, I still am all fucked up. But If These Walls Could Talk Too, and Boys Don't Cry, it just, there was, I think, I didn't even realize at the time how dark that was. I think it was just, what the reality was, and knowing that things are a little bit different now. I look back and I'm like, God, That's horrific. You know, what did that mean? You know, back then, internalized a lot of it, turns out. So
yeah. I think some of the other films that were really like impacted me that had sort of a different effect were things like Better Than Chocolate and The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love, which I think gets to some of that stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later about queer joy, because I think they had actually more of those experiences embedded in them. But definitely anything that was kind of in the mainstream was like,
wait, what was the one with Piper Perabo where she plays Polly? She's got the hawk. Can't remember the name of it ever. I love the movie. She kills herself at the end. It was all of that. You know?
I have that somewhere, and I cannot remember the name of it.
I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna go like find it in the drawer over here.
So I think for me, what's problematic about all of this is it like portrays the queer experience as this experience of trauma and pain, which it doesn't have to be. And like, that's not how I think about my queer identity at all, even though I have had experiences with trauma and pain. It's not who how I think about my identity. And I think if I did, I would be suicidal about that instead of about all the other things I get suicidal about. Because I'm suicidal all the time. But it's almost never connected to like my queer identity anymore. I think when I was young, there were moments where I was like experiencing some hateful shit and I wanted to kill myself already. And so then I was like, well, maybe I could also get revenge on these people by killing myself and naming them, which is, we're not allowed to talk about that as suicide attempt survivors, but because nobody really likes that one. But I think that kind of factored in for me. So I think the things that the data does tell us about suicide is that queer people who have experiences of painful, traumatic marginalization and whose identities are not honored by their families and communities are more likely to experience suicidal thoughts. And it's like, okay, no shit. Thanks for doing all the research to tell us something that everybody already knew. The things that I think the data doesn't tell us is it doesn't tell us that like being queer means being suicidal, right? What it tells us is that like experiences of injustice make people want to kill themselves. So I think some of the things that can happen is people kind of get hung up on thinking like it's a factor of queerness or a factor of that identity or whatever that is the thing that makes people think about suicide, as opposed to really exploring how this society that wasn't built with us in mind is making us want to die. And of course it is, because it wasn't built for us to be here. And I think some of the things that have been really notable to me about that is like how much I feel like there's been so much that's changed since I came out about like what I know queer life can be like. So things about like being able to get married and have a family and have children and like, I don't know, live somewhere and not be consistently targeted for hate crimes or things like that. I don't know if I thought that was like possible when I was young, because that's not what I was hearing about. And I don't think it was as possible as it is now. Okay, so Rin says that the assumed over association is a big issue, and she's glad that researchers are looking into queer suicide, but it's frustrating how much of this research is cross-sectional and implicitly assumes that identity is static, known from a young age, and must temporarily precede suicidality. So yeah, I think that's really important as well, is that the way we think about identity has changed over time, especially queer identities. And oftentimes the way we do research about it has not really caught up with the way that we think about identity. And I think particularly when you look at things like the CDC or other spaces, like they're not even collecting that information still. So I think that's important too, is that I talk about epistemic injustice all the time. I think it's really important. But one of the factors of, so epistemic injustice is a harm that's done to you as a knower, as someone who knows information and has knowledge. And one of the types of epistemic injustice is when you are kept from having access to information about yourself or your people. And that systematically happens to queer people because our identities aren't always captured on the census, or they're not always reported in suicide death data or suicide attempt data. I can't tell you how many studies people collect information. They collect information about your like LGBT status, I guess, as a part of their survey when they're doing the study, and they still don't report on information about that population. So it's really shocking to me how little access to information we still have, given how much things have actually changed. And that when we do start to look at the research, I think a lot of times what we end up doing is sort of looking at one specific thing that we already think is true. So this idea that like, it's not safe for queer people to access mental health care. So we're going to look at that. Well, we'll find information about exactly that, but we're not going to find more broadly things about like what does work for people in mental health care when they're queer, or what are the people doing instead of accessing mental health treatment, and does that work better than mental health treatment to begin with, things like that. So being kept from access to that information and having people not even care about that information, I think is a really big contributor to the way we think about suicide among queer people, because we just don't know as much as we ought to know about it.
Mm-hmm. Time for me to break in here.
Yes,
we're having some sort of tech issue with the students.
Oh no.
Don't understand what happened. They're all there are a bunch of them backstage.
I happened.
Amy, you are ruining my life.
I know. That's my job.
I know. So students who are backstage, the bandwidth is becoming an issue. If you could go watch on Facebook or Twitter, on Facebook, we're just Suicide and Stuff on both. You can pull them up on either platform, and you'll be able to watch us live. But having you backstage is making things all janky.
So when we say that this is a sharing point, you may join that link again, and then we'll admit you so that you can be on the podcast and share. But I was mistaken and gave you and told you the link to go to for viewing too. But let's go to Facebook Live or Twitter right now, if you want to view, and then we'll come back to the Zoom afterward.
All right. So I was actually going to see if anybody wanted to share their experiences now.
So I guess stay on.
So if there are some people who would like to share some of how they connect to this, their experiences of like queerness and suicide, or the connection between those things, you can stay on in that room and Des can let folks in.
All right. Well, now I've got Skylar and Anna, but I don't know if they want to come on here and talk to us. So if either of you want to come on and talk to us, turn on your cam and your mic, and I'll put you in with us. In the meantime, we need like the Jeopardy theme song too.
You have the angel, but it didn't work.
But the angel didn't work.
I know. We'll have it next time.
I know. I don't want to get spanked by one of the music companies. You know, God forbid they don't make their 2 cents on us playing a song on a live stream.
Yeah. So in the meantime, I think there's some key findings from the Trevor Projects data that are sort of interesting and worth thinking about. So we know that about 40% of LGBTQ respondents considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months, and it's a youth survey, the Trevor Projects LGBT youth survey. And more than half of trans and non-binary youth have seriously considered suicide. So one of the things that I see happening really, really frequently in our community that that I think is really heartbreaking and a really important sort of a point for activism is that the issues that affect queer people disproportionately affect trans and non-binary people. And as queer people, I don't think we show up for, as like other parts of the queer community, I don't think we show up for them nearly enough or in ways that we should. I think sometimes it comes from self-preservation that we distance ourselves from our trans and non-binary family, but they really need our support, especially our Black, Indigenous, and people of color trans and non-binary family who are literally just being murdered at extraordinary rates. We really need to show up for them. 68% of queer youth reported symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder in the past 2 weeks, including more than 3 in 4 trans and non-binary youth. About half engaged in self-harm in the past 12 months, including over 60% of trans and non-binary youth. And then about half of them also reported that they wanted psychological or emotional counseling from a mental health professional, but were unable to receive it. And I think this is a really important piece of information too, is that there, so much of the messaging that we send to people is like, get help. So help is already pretty hard to find when you're suicidal. If you're suicidal and experiencing a marginalized identity or multiple marginalized identities, finding a safe provider is really, really hard. And then depending on where you live and what your insurance is, it can all get harder and harder and harder. And there's like not any real reliable training for people on either suicide or on LGBT issues. So I think it's just a really complicated situation to try and find a mental health provider. You all don't know if you're watching from the school, but in general, I say disparaging things about the mental health system, working in it. And traditional treatment therapy has never been like a pathway to healing for me. But peer support has. And I think it's this really powerful thing that we're never measuring, we're never talking about. And the queer community has been pretty good at doing that for a long time. I think we have provided peer support to each other because we've had to. Do you have like queer elders that have been involved in your life in different ways?
Yeah, not many, but definitely a handful. There's I have a lesbian couple in Canada who have kind of always been there for me when, you know, things got weird. And I met one of them on a diary website, you know, years ago when I was like in my early 20s, and they've always been supportive of me. They've always been supportive of the project. Excuse these babies. They're a big reason why Live Through This exists. I have a couple of other queer elders, my friend April. And those are the people who kept me alive when I was extra suicidal.
Yeah, that stuff has been really powerful for me as well. It was also helpful for me. So I'm someone who experiences extreme states and what people would call psychosis, but that's not the term I like to use for it. And so for me, having people, peer support from people who had experienced that, but specifically support from like elders in that community, both around my queer identity and around those experiences of extreme states and altered realities was like literally something that kept me alive. I don't know how I would be doing things or existing in the world without that. So I think that those things are really powerful, and I don't see us measuring anything about that either, right? We're not looking at those experiences, or even because we're not measuring some of that stuff. I have a fly that's like all on me and I can't get
one of those too.
Black Olives Matter. I'm so glad we've got trolls on Periscope. We do have Anna here who wants to pop in and talk.
Oh, great. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna do it. Hope you're ready.
Oh, wait, just kidding. Anna's here.
Hi.
Hey guys.
Hey.
I kind of had a question for y'all. I have been blessed with two parents who both had mental health stuff. So I was kind of doomed from the get-go. And I definitely knew that I had mental health issues before I knew that I was also super gay. And I guess that it didn't occur to me for a very long time that being queer might also be contributing to some of the things. And I know for me, when I started therapy, I honestly don't know if queer therapists were a thing. It surely didn't feel like that when I was younger. And I guess I was kind of wondering, like, what are your thoughts on the intersectionality of, you know, I think we have, I don't know, I see ads all the time now for, you know, therapists who are specializing in working with queer folks. And, you know, I would just kind of love to hear your thoughts on, you know, is that a step in the right direction, or is that maybe stereotyping a little bit that, you know, mental health issues are super niche?
I mean, I think not having to explain the experience of being queer to someone all the time in therapy would be cool. Or like not having to explain how it might be a factor in an experience that you're having might be cool. I have seen a number of people who like put that they're specialized in things. Like, I have a specialization in this, and I'm like, how? Like,
What
it's
does
not
that mean?
what
How'd you do
experience.
that?
Like, what do you teach? You get a certificate in it? Like, so I don't know. Like, I've seen like white folks who are like, oh, I specialize in like interracial relationships, or I specialize in like racial equity, and I'm like, I don't think like maybe you're thinking about how you contribute to white supremacy, but you're not really specializing in like racial equity, because we're not there. So yeah, so I think there's benefit in being able to speak to someone that you don't have to explain everything about your experience to, and who might not make assumptions that because you're having that experience that it, you know, whatever is true about you. I don't think it's necessary. I think finding a therapist that's a good fit for you is going to be a combination of all of that stuff. And I don't find therapists that are good fits for me, so I'm probably not even the one who should be
You're totally not the one who should be talking about this.
No. But I can bring the skepticism because I hate them.
Okay.
Jess is going to be a therapist, and I like her. So, but you're not yet. So we'll see. Maybe I won't like you anymore.
Maybe that would suck.
Yeah, it would suck a lot.
Yeah. So I think I don't really care about having a queer therapist. It was nice to have a queer therapist, you know, because of what Jess was saying. I didn't need to explain certain things. You know, there were shortcuts. But on the other hand, I just had a therapist for 4 years who I thought was queer, and she chose not to share with me that she wasn't. And when I found out, I lost my shit. I was like, you led me to believe for years that you knew things that I was talking about, like you, and you didn't. And what the fuck is that? So that can go either way. My current therapist isn't queer as far as I know. Super fine. I don't think that turns mental health or suicidality into a niche thing. You know, we have our preferences. When I go to a doctor, I would rather see a female doctor. I don't feel comfortable with men near my body necessarily. So I think it's kind of like that. Who do you feel most comfortable with? And I think, you know, there should be options there for all of us. I think someone who's not queer saying they specialize in LGBTQ things is pretty strange, and they shouldn't do that. That's all I got.
Yeah, but I think that, like, you know, I'm looking at some of the comments in my students' chat, and I mean, even just myself, like, Des, you've known me most of my adult life, and like, I have somehow ended up in some of the most rural areas that I could possibly conceive. And simply just having someone with an identity that matches mine or even comes close to like skimming the surface of mine is hard. And so you make a lot of concessions. Like, you know, you're like, well, this person, you know, like my counselor is free. So like for me, it's like, well, it's free. So like, what do I got to complain about? At least I have access to counseling. Fortunately, my counselor is awesome. And we had the queer talk really early, being like, hey, if this isn't for you, or if you're not like queer friendly, or like if that's not within your values, like that's cool. I just need to know that like now, because I don't need you to traumatize me any further than I already am. But I think that, you know, for like thinking about my students of color, having like, for instance, a Latin queer counselor here in the great Upper Peninsula of Michigan, well, that's really not going to be something that's going to be as feasible. Not that it couldn't happen, but like the likelihood of that particular intersection of identities to be available isn't really feasible. I mean, even doctors and such like that, right? Like physical doctors, you make, well, I have to make concessions and being like, all right, well, this doctor doesn't get it, but at least she's trying to get it. And I can have some conversations with her, but I got to kind of really walk her through a lot of stuff about as it relates to like non-binary identity and gender dysphoria, and like how an IUD isn't really the solution to like my gender problems. And you know what I mean? Right. Like, but that's the same thing when we're talking about mental health, right? Like that even having access to someone that even understands like a sliver of these marginalizations is hard.
Yeah. I think it's always important to like have your list of the things that are most important to you. And to, before you do any intake, you should interview your therapist. And if they don't let you, you shouldn't go. And you should send them a shitty letter and, you know, report them to DORA or whatever your reporting agency is in your state. That might be more aggressive than most people want to go with, but like they should be able to answer questions for you before you have to pay to go in and see them. And if your intake costs you money, then they suck too. Because basically intakes are like, let's unpack all of your trauma, not to help you with anything, and then send you away and maybe you'll come back. The average number of therapy appointments a person goes to is 1. So it's not good. So if you're going to go, like, grill them a little bit. And so for me,
sure.
like things that I would want to ask about are like, are you going to force treat me? Do you think being queer is like a sin or something that's like a disease or whatever? So like I ask them all the hard questions. And if they're not willing to answer them, like they're probably not very good at their jobs. So I think that's kind of the space that I would more lean toward, is like, think about what you want them to be like and then ask them if they're that. But ask them in challenging ways, just not like yes or no. But like, so I have every time I have to see a provider, I ask them like how many people they've hospitalized. And I do that for my physical health care providers too. How many people have you hospitalized for mental health thing? And I won't go if it seems like a lot to me. I don't know. And a lot depends on the day for me because all of them have done it pretty much. So, yeah, so things like that I think are really important so that you have the relationship you want.
I do that too. That self-advocacy piece is huge, and they don't teach us to do that. I didn't learn it until I was 30 years old, and it's like, how could things have been different if I would have known that I could ask questions, that I didn't have to give them my money before I walked in the room and felt, harmed by them.
Right.
So yeah, that's huge. I ask similar questions. What are you going to do if I walk in here suicidal? Are you okay talking about suicide? Are you okay talking about self-injury? Do you know the difference between the two? That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You got anything else for us, Anna?
So I think, and the other things that I think have been relevant for some people I know is like, if you have diagnosis specific stuff, that's worth exploring too. Like how many people with, for example, some of them more like stigmatized or discriminated against diagnoses like borderline personality disorder. You should ask people what they think about borderline personality disorder, and how they've treated people,
bipolar
what
disorder,
work, all of that. Schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, all of those kinds of things that people, whatever you're learning about in your abnormal psych class. Yeah, those ones you want to ask about, which is still a class, and somebody should stop that on a national scale from happening anymore. Because what the fuck does that mean? But yeah. Did that answer your question? I feel like we went on a big tangent.
No, that's okay. That was kind of the point of the question. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks.
Thank you for coming on.
Do we have anybody else in the background there?
No.
Oh, nobody's
Booping you, Anna.
So we usually do a section of this that's called
cute.
Beef Corner.
Do we want to beef?
I think we should beef. It's getting close to time already.
I know, what the hell? My beefies are gone.
Your beef?
No, they're not. Just kidding. Here they are.
So the Beef Corner is just when we talk about things that we're mad about, which is usually what we do the whole show, but now we have a special section for it also.
Yeah. Where
we can talk about beefs that are outside of the suicide world, although usually mine have to do with suicide anyway. So, Des, do you have any beefs that you want to start us off with?
I did not prepare beefs.
You didn't prepare any beefs?
I did not prepare beefs. I have beefs with my children. I have beefs with contractors. Why don't these people know how to show the fuck up for work? I'm trying to give you my money. What the shit is that? Every single contractor I've tried to come get and fix some shit, they don't show up when they say they will. So I have beef with that. My stepdad's contractor, he does the same fucking shit. What is wrong with these people? I have beefs with some of my classmates in my MSW program because they're shit shows, and I have beefs with other stuff. I don't know. I'm real mad about a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah, Des is angry. I love it when Des is angry. I mean, like, not for you, but I just love how you act when you're angry.
Great.
So I just sort of live with like a pretty high level of rage all the time. It's the only thing that keeps me alive, pretty much. So, so it's different. Like Des gets like angry and then she's like nice again, and I'm just like rage all the time. But I think my sort of current beef is just it's like a fear / anger about the way we're talking about there's a lot of people talking about abolishing policing, which is great. We should do that. Separate conversation. But we're talking a lot about having mental health professionals sort of step into the role that police play. And so first there's a lot of complications there, but my concern is that there's this idea that like, social workers and therapists and psychologists and whatever are like not cops, and like we can act like cops and do all the time. So there's like still this sort of infrastructure that's built around mental health and around people's experiences and the things that we think people should be stopped from doing that they're still going to use coercion. And so if we're just transferring coercion from law enforcement to mental health, like that's not fucking worth it. And I certainly don't want my profession to be that level involved in it. So stop just saying we need more social workers, because there's a lot of shitty social workers who just want to lock people up too. And then we just be moving the carceral system right over into the mental health system, which is also a carceral system. Everything is fucked.
I have comments on that.
You have comments?
Yeah, I sure fucking do. All of my professors probably think I'm insane because I'm like, all this paperwork you have me role playing is fucked up. Like, you're telling me I have to tell someone that I'm going to hospitalize them if they're suicidal. Do you know what suicidal means? Or if they're psychotic, do you know what that means? Do you even know what it fucking means?
Wait, there's having you do paperwork that just says if you're psychotic, period? Like
if you're suicidal or psychotic. So I'm always like, hey, do you know that people can just like live every day in a psychotic state? Do you know that? Oh yeah, I tell them all about you. Sorry, but like, ugh. And I'm like, do you know there's a whole fucking genre of philosophy that's about death and like the meaning of life and picking all that apart. What do you mean? Why is this in your paperwork? Why are you saying like, we should be asking what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you, if you can't even get basic shit like paperwork down? So these are things I've been raging about in school. I'm very well liked right now.
Yay. Yeah, I was well liked in school too. When I was in school, I was busy writing papers I didn't need to write and turning them in and forcing my professors to grade them, because that's how my crazy manifests itself in big ways when I was coming off of medications. So really great choice to come off of meds. Really weird for faculty, probably. Sorry, y'all, for that, kind of.
Sorry about it.
Sorry, I'm super nerdy when I'm psychotic. Okay, let's pivot from beef corner. Unless Amy.
We're leaving. Amy, do you have beefs?
I have beef with everything right now. Mostly, I would probably say like just everyone. Yeah, I mean, you know, present company excluded. Yeah, it's been like a heavy couple of weeks, especially I think for my queer students. We had a huge rally for a number 45, who I will remain never to say their name or their administration, because I don't want that person to have any more airtime than they already got. But I don't know, it's just like I've got beef with people who can't understand that we can all do more and that we can do way more, even just in our personal small spheres, to really be better for everyone. And I guess I'm encouraged that my one neighbor doesn't have a Trump sign up this year, but does have a Ross Perot 92 sign on. So like, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I don't know. And I don't know, it's just like, I think I'm frustrated.
Pretend to be Ross Perot once?
I'm sorry?
What?
Did Amanda Bynes pretend to be Ross Perot?
Oh yeah, that's on
Probably.
All That and the Amanda Bynes show. Oh yeah, that's the only time I remember anything about Ross Perot is like 90s Nickelodeon, like Saturday night, like jams. Yeah.
I just love Amanda Bynes a lot.
Oh, I still love that human. She is next level, and I am here for all of it.
Me too.
Agree. Do we want to look at comments real fast?
Yeah, let's look at them.
All right, let's look at those Runes comments essay here. From a therapist perspective, it can be important for diagnosis and care sometimes. I've seen people who are not good diagnosticians over-pathologize normal queer experiences, which sucks and can be avoided sometimes if you have a therapist with the same identity. I've seen the flip side too, though, where therapists from the same background under-challenge clients because they relate too much and thus are less effective for actually helping clients towards their goals.
Yeah, I think enmeshment is something that's not talked about enough in the mental health field, and people are really, really scared to recognize that in themselves. But I feel like enmeshment happens a lot where if you ever feel like your therapist is more invested in the outcomes of your therapy than you, I would be concerned about that. Or if they're more invested in like what pathway you're taking or whatever, or like trying to do decision making, or you feel like they're your friend. All that,
I agree with that.
not cool.
Yeah, I had a friend who like had come out as pretty newly queer and is a cisgender man, but was like just sort of just coming to this queerness, revelation in his 30s. And he told me that his counselor like hugged him. And I was like, did you ask for a hug? Like that's strange to me, and like sort of his course for like understanding his queerness was like so strangely clinical. And I think maybe you should shop for a new counselor because this sounds like some boundary breaking. Whereas like, I know that my counselor helped me through my big queer divorce. And I felt like, she would say straight up, she's like, I probably shouldn't say this, but you need to get divorced. Like, this is unhealthy for you. And I was like, I know. And she would give me tools every session being like, hey, have you ever looked at this book? It's How to Get Divorced in Michigan, blah, blah, blah. When I had to get divorced, this is what I used. and I feel like that was like a different and one time I asked to hug her because I freaking love my counselor. And she was like, yeah, that sounds great. But she doesn't even acknowledge me in like the grocery store. And I've seen her at Walmart before, which is cool.
Yeah.
Because like there are those like boundaries that are definitely there.
Mhm.
But I just think that like, I agree, like your counselor can be like someone who's of the same identity or has similar identities or doesn't have to be. And I think that there are different folks who need that, right? Like, especially when
Yeah.
we're talking about like aspirations within like different marginal identities, whether it be people of color or within queerness and whatnot, like having someone who has your lived experience might be more relatable and tangible. Yeah.
But then the other part is like, if what you want is to connect with someone who has a shared experience with you, peer support might be the route to go for that. And so then you seek out peer support around whichever part of who you are is the thing that makes you want to connect with someone. So you can get peer support like within the queer community. You can also get queer support around your sort of mental health experiences as well, or both, like depending on what you're looking for. So Trans Lifeline is just, I think, the best example of this. They're wonderful and I love them. So always check out Trans Lifeline as a resource. But I think there's lots of options for peer support that open up different pathways and broaden what like mental health, what it means to like grow in your mental health, I guess, if you even call it mental health. But I think, like therapy and clinical interventions are a very specific thing. And so we don't need to try and make them into these other things that actually exist in other spaces. All right, let's talk about queer joy.
Let's do it. We were supposed to be talking about that for like a minute.
I know. I have a lot to say today, I guess. I don't know. It's shocking and totally unlike every other day. So something I've just been really interested in lately in activist work is really thinking about how experiences of joy in marginalized communities are like experiencing joy in a world that wasn't built for us is an act of resistance, and that we don't have to be fighting all the time for things, even though I think advocacy is great. But I think it's important to recognize that when we invest in experiencing joy and building the lives that we choose to live, those things are our resistance work, and to sort of honor them as that and treat them as sacred as I would treat activist work. And so some people don't think about activism as sacred, but I do. So that's something I've been really thinking about and trying to intentionally engage in my life. And it's been really, really powerful for me. And I think that's something that I would never have thought of. No one ever told me about, and probably would have been like a nice way to like not feel in pain all the time when I was younger. So I think some examples of that is like, I'm sure many of you who are queer people who are watching have had the experience of like being around your people and feeling like safe and connected and like a part of something bigger than you. The data tells us that that's suicide prevention, right? Because we have like the Trevor Project has this data about like if your identity is honored and recognized by people that you care about, you're less likely to die by suicide. So it's not just resistance work. It's also suicide prevention to be doing that. And so it's suicide prevention to be doing that for yourself, and it's suicide prevention to be doing that for your people. So creating spaces for that joy matters. And so if that means like you're going to have a party, I don't think it should always be a party where you get really intoxicated with your friends, but you could have a party where you get intoxicated with your friends, and that can be resistance, which is sort of like what happened with Pride, although I think we went a little too hard into the party sometimes and a little less into the resistance space. But I think that those, the queer community has had Pride for a long time, so we've recognized that this is important. but having intentionality about it and recognizing it for that is different than just showing up to the party, right? Or, you know, taking moments where you're in community with someone or having an experience of like being in love with someone, or whatever it is, and taking a moment to like recognize and make meaning out of that and not just let it be something that passes us by, is really powerful and really important work to be doing. And like, if you can also share about what that's like in different spaces, that helps other people too, right? It's not just our experience of joy isn't just for us, it's for other people too.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you got about joy.
Well, I don't feel much joy these days.
You got 2 babies and a wife, and you own a home together.
Excuse me, you sound like a fucking crisis counselor. Get out of here with that shit.
I'm just saying, those are things you tell me bring you joy. That you didn't.
I'm gonna take you off of here. I'm gonna kick you out of this room.
Yeah, do it.
I currently do not feel joy very often. Mostly, I just feel fucking like despair.
Yeah, I feel
but yes, my babies bring me joy. My wife brings me joy when I get to see her. But like, these COVIDious times mean we're both working until 2 a.m. pretty much every night. We don't get to hang out. Like, I don't know. So yes, these things bring me joy when I get to enjoy them. Okay. And recently, you know, I was working too hard, and I work harder than most of the people around me in certain contexts. And so I just decided to kind of set it down. In fact, I was told to set it down.
Was it me?
No, it was one of my professors.
Oh.
Just like, stop. Also, Fel yelled at me, if we're being real. And so, you know, I was more intentional about setting my work down and paying attention. And that has actually really been very helpful in a time that's been really fucking dark for me. So yes, all of those things are queer joy. And, you know, I revel in the fact that I'm able to be a married person, something I never thought I would be able to be, as we discussed earlier. Yeah. Not only married, divorced, and then married again. I get the whole gamut.
Yeah.
Divorce club. No, but I mean, I think that's amazing and beautiful. And like, even though government and all that shit's weird, it's just nice to have something you never thought you would that you really wanted. So I do think those things are really important, and I like to talk about them and reminisce about them. And I like to have my feelings at Fel, and sometimes she's like, so many feelings, like what's happening? But yes, queer joy is very important.
Yeah. And I think it behooves us to make space for that in our activist work too. Because like, wow, the fights are big and long, and we don't win very often. So if we don't remember the spaces where we get to have those experiences of joy, because you don't have to win to have an experience of joy, right? So if we don't do those things, it feels pretty bleak. And when things feel bleak, I want to kill myself. I'm sure other people do too, based on all of my knowledge working in crisis. That is the case. So it can really help us from feeling bleak about things. And I think you can like intentionally try and do that, like turn your brain off, turn the news off, turn the whatever off, and make the space for that. And it's okay to not be focusing on all the ways that like people are trying to take our rights or trying to kill us or whatever it might be in that moment.
Saturday off.
Yeah, just have a fun Saturday night that's queer and full of joy. And then you're preventing suicide. And if someone's mean to you about it, be like, well, I was trying to make sure people don't die. Sorry. So
we got 5 more minutes. And we have someone backstage, Misha. But Misha doesn't have their camera on, so I don't know if they want to talk to us. let us know by turning your camera on. Otherwise, continue.
Do we have comments on the Facebooks and stuff? Oh, there's lots happening.
All kinds of comments. I haven't been able to keep up because I've been trying to tweet about you.
Tweet about me?
Says, well, yeah, your comments, you know, your fancy words.
I'm not saying anything fancy.
Let's see. Joelle has a comment about some peer staff. I've also been wondering about boundaries in clinical and peer support because of the variety of backgrounds our peer staff are coming in with. What is the concern here? I don't know.
I think peer staff or peer support shouldn't be clinical. Like it should be like purely support based. Like people shouldn't be guiding those sorts of support groups with any sort of clinician unless they are clinically designated for that particular group. I think that, in my opinion, like peer supports should really be about like sharing experiences and sharing tools and strategies that like might work for each other, but not from a clinical perspective. And I think that you get to draw the line, I think, to what the boundaries look like in either respect, whether it be clinical or in a peer support group. There are anonymous ones, there are closed ones, there are open ones. You know, you have to decide where your queerness lies and what sort of relationship you want with those particular groups.
Well, I screwed up. Joel was responding to someone else. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. Amy had thoughts though. That was Leah's question.
What?
It's fine. Continue.
Me continue?
We only have a couple minutes left.
Okay. So I think peer support should be like a whole separate and sort of unique service that's being provided that has pretty different boundaries from clinical support. And there's lots and lots of good templates for that. And some of them are going to be queer specific and some aren't. So I'm happy to direct anyone to some resources around that. But I always say intentional peer support is the best training that you can get, and go do that. So that's sort of my general approach. And if you want something that's a little bit more suicide specific, Alternatives to Suicide has training for people to facilitate alternatives to suicide support groups. And I think those take the best approach that I've seen around peer support. So I'm just, those are my favorite ones. There's other stuff out there, like Dee Dee Hirsch has their clinician hanging out with a peer. But then they had a thing for a while where they were like, oh, you don't actually have to have a peer running your support group. And I was like, so you're actually running a clinical group? That's not a peer support group.
No.
Stop it. And there's a structured, right, and it ends. And so it's really designed.
Yeah, it's like on an 8-week cycle.
Yeah, I went and got trained in it. And then they were like, during the training, they were like, you don't always have to have a peer. And ideally, you just want a peer who's been through the program so they can like help people through the program. And so I was like, oh, so you want like a compliance peer. That's not me.
Hard no there.
But yeah, but there's lots of templates for doing peer support effectively.
Locally, we have some alternatives to suicide slides getting snuck into the QPR.
What?
Some of the ideas from Alternatives to Suicide getting snuck into the QPR presentations.
So
yeah. That's kind of.
Oh, QPR.
QPR, man.
I don't like that.
Alas.
We don't have time for that rabbit hole.
That's a different
but
episode.
I think those gatekeeper trainings are terrible. You can tell because the name is Gatekeeper.
I'm getting trained to be a trainer this month.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm trained to be a trainer, too. I think I was a master trainer. I could have trained you to be a trainer, but I won't.
I think it's a good way to fuck things up, Go and change all the slides.
And get them approved.
Use your power.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
That's my plan. That's what I'm going to do. See how it works. I'll let you know. Final thoughts. It is 8:05 p.m. on the East Coast.
Oh, yeah. Final thoughts. do really fun queer stuff with your queer people and create community that matters to you, because we know the world wasn't built with us in mind, but we can create things that are. And that's how you make meaning and live the life you want to live. My final
Are we supposed to follow that? Are we supposed to follow that for real?
You might be
I
the final thought.
a shitty diaper, and that's what
final
you're
thought.
say. Amy,
you can grow up to be just like Des and change some shitty diapers.
So many shitty diapers. Amy, what you got?
Yeah. What?
Do you have a final thought?
My final thought is to find what brings you joy, like, and those things can be changing and ever evolving. And I think that I was 30 when I realized that I needed a queer community, because I kind of was probably, some internalized homophobia and like gender stuff going on. But I always thought, like, I was like, I hate rainbows and I don't really care about this or that for myself. And I think it's just because I was in historically pretty, like homogenous communities where I didn't really have that afforded to me. And when I would try to tap into like this queer spirit, it was always like, groups for lesbians, and I don't identify as a lesbian, or groups for, transgender individuals, and I don't identify as transgender, I identify as non-binary. It's sort of like trying to find these sort of pathways. But when I moved here, I got to work with some awesome people on a research project about queer rurality, and I started to find my people where I was like, oh, maybe I don't need to wear rainbows and like march in a pride parade or like party my face off with like gay men in their underwear. But I most certainly can find communities that affirm me or that see me and recognize me without having to explain the queerness, right? Like that you can simply enter into this community and it's like, oh, you're queer, like, cool. Because that's like the least interesting thing about me, I think. I'm not sure what the most interesting is, but being queer or my gender issues is definitely not the most interesting things. And so I think that when I was able to find the community that affirmed me, then everything else, like, I could find joy in, even if they were not necessarily joyful acts.
See? Great final thoughts from people who are not me.
Yeah. If you have a beard, you can put glitter in it, and that's cool too. That's a queer thing that I've seen a lot of that I appreciate.
I will full admit, and like, I'm just going to leave this as my final thought, that one time I watched, and one time being like multiple times, but like one time I happened upon it where there was, I don't know if this is still a trend, but like on Facebook Live, there are people like, like Sharons and Barbaras of the world who can go on and buy like unshucked oysters for pearls, and then someone opens it and it's like, God, yes. Surprise, Barbara, you got a sherbet pearl. Oh my gosh, it's a double. You got a chocolate one and a pearlescence one. And then like they can buy like fittings and stuff. And there is like a stereotypically very flamboyant gay man with a glitter beard who does this, and I got lost in a whirlwind of Facebook videos of him shucking oysters for pearls for Barbaras and Sharons and Karens.
I don't know exactly what I'm doing tonight for the rest.
Oh, I am sorry for the things that I have started.
Don't apologize. This is going to be so good.
2 things. My own personal Karen is the reason that I know about that shit. Secondly, Anna wants us to know that glitter beards are the shit.
They are the shit. You mean your mom, Karen? Your own personal.
Yes, my personal Karen.
Yeah, Mama Karen.
Who is no longer identifying as Karen.
Oh yeah, she's JoJo now. Yeah, it's fine. She's no longer a Karen.
We'll see.
Okay. We're gonna go talk to amazing queer students.
All right, queer students. We'll see you on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye.